hold on, sorry. Okay, so just a little bit about me and why I'm doing this. In 2014, I founded the community action program Empower You, which works to educate students in my county in K through 12 about sexual assault and harassment on campus. I listened to an NPR story about sexual assault and harassment on college campus, and I was like, this is insane. I'm preparing to go off to school. My school is preparing me to go off to school, but no one is telling me that there's this threat out there and that all of my friends and I are, going off to college and this is going to be facing us and we're not prepared. And when I did further research, I found out the statistics for college assault is the same in high school and middle school. So I was like, this threat is already facing me and I have no idea, and neither do any of my friends, and I need to do something about this. So through my research, I found Stop Sexual Assault in Schools, which is a nonprofit that's taking on K through 12 campus assault and harassment across the country, and I've been on their advisory board. Also in my own school, I'm a student at Florida State University, and I'm part of the No More Student Advisory Board, which works to end and educate on power-based personal violence on our own campus. So yeah, that's just a little bit about me. And this is just an overview of kind of what I wanted to address, just so that we make sure we cover everything, some definitions, some fact versus fiction, cover K through 12 in college and Title IX, bystander effect, rape culture, some stuff that's going on in the news, what we can do to get involved on a macro and micro level, and some resources that are out there. So I wanted to start with definitions because since sexual assault and harassment are not taught in schools, there's definitely some ambiguity on like these definitions. What is sexual assault? What is sexual harassment? What is consent? So I wanted to make sure that we all had the proper definitions for these things. So starting with sexual assault is sexual conduct or behavior that occurs without any explicit consent. So rape is just one example of sexual assault. So a lot of people are led to believe or are taught that sexual assault is just rape, but that's actually not the case. Rape is penetration of a victim's body, but different things that fall under the umbrella of sexual assault are attempted rape, forcing someone to perform a sexual act, or any unwanted sexual touching. So it's actually a few different things, not just rape. So then sexual harassment is any unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, or any other verbal or physical harassment of a sexual nature in the workplace or learning environment. And sexual harassment is really an umbrella term. A lot of people get confused between sexual assault and harassment, but sexual assault falls under the umbrella term of sexual harassment. As he said in the definition, sexual harassment is really any kind of unwanted sexual advances. So that includes rape, that includes sexual assault, and it also includes an array of other things that are up here on this slide. So like exposing yourself to someone in a workplace or a learning environment, or discussing sexual or race relationships in an inappropriate place. That could be like at school or at work, or anywhere that kind of talk would seem inappropriate. All right, and then this is the big one, consent. I was never taught about consent in school. I don't really know anyone who was taught about consent in school, and consent is really important because it is what fuels sexual assault and harassment, because if you don't have consent, then it is sexual harassment. So consent is an agreement between people who are participating or intending to engage in sexual activity. And when I was doing my work in my county, the biggest thing that I noticed when I would go to these different schools and try to educate people on sexual assault and harassment is nobody knew what consent was. And the important thing with consent is that it is black and white. It's yes or no, like I do want to engage in this with you, or no, I do not. There is no gray area with consent. Oh, sorry, I'm not ready for that yet. So with consent, it's all about communication, but it doesn't have to be a verbal yes or no, but verbal consent can definitely make things a lot easier. But if somebody doesn't seem like they're wanting to do something with you, they probably don't. It should be continual and ongoing. Just because someone gives you consent for one thing doesn't mean they're giving you consent for other things, and you can change your mind at any time. There's also, it has to be there's ages of giving consent. You have to be a certain age. They're called like Romeo and Juliet laws. So they're different in every state, but usually it's between 10 and 18, which like 10 seems a little young to me to be giving consent. But yeah, so there are legal rules like put in place around the proper age to give consent. And so since consent can be kind of confusing sometimes, I thought that this video would be really helpful. It's very cute and it is perfect for teaching consent. So.
If you're still struggling with consent,
Can you guys
just
hear it?
imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? And they go, oh my God, fuck yes, I would fucking love a cup of tea. Thank you. Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? And they're like, I'm not really sure. Then you could make them a cup of tea or not, but be aware they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important part, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you are entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say no thank you, then don't make them tea at all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea. Don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea, okay? They might say, yes, please, that's kind of you. And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying as you've gone to all the effort of making the tea, but they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they don't. Some people change their mind in the time that it takes to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk. And it's okay for people to change their mind. And you are still not entitled to watch them drink it. And if they're unconscious, don't make them tea. Unconscious people don't want tea. And they can't answer the question, do you want tea? Because they're unconscious. Okay, maybe they were conscious when you asked them if they wanted tea. And they said yes. But in the time it took you to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk, they are now unconscious. You should just put the tea down. Make sure the unconscious person is safe. And this is the important part again. Don't make them drink the tea. They said yes then, sure, but unconscious people don't want tea. If someone said yes to tea, started drinking it, and then passed out before they'd finished it, don't keep on pouring it down their throat. Take the tea away. Make sure they're safe, because unconscious people don't want tea. Trust me on this. If someone said yes to tea around your house last Saturday, that doesn't mean they want you to make them tea all the time. They don't want you to come around to their place unexpectedly and make them tea and force them to drink it going, but you wanted tea last week. Or to wake up to find you pouring tea down their throat going, but you wanted tea last night. But if you can understand how completely ludicrous it is to force people to have tea when they don't want tea, and you're able to understand when people don't want tea, then how hard is it to understand it when it comes to sex? Whether it's tea or sex, consent is everything. And on that note, I'm going to go make myself a cup of tea.
So just a cute way to show the importance of consent and kind of illustrate it. Okay. So kind of went over this already, but what consent should look like. Asking, is this okay? Receiving an affirmative yes or an affirmative no, and taking physical cues. Again, if someone isn't acting or look like they're interested in what you're doing, they're probably not. And then what consent should not look like. So it shouldn't look like refusing to acknowledge someone's no, assuming that certain clothing, flirting, or kissing is an invitation for anything more. Someone being under the legal age of consent, again, Romeo and Juliet laws, pressuring someone, or assuming because you've done it before, that means you can do it again. All right, so I thought that just to make sure that we can all gauge where we are with sexual assault and harassment, we could do a little like fact versus fiction. So I'm going to say some statements and you guys can like think to yourself, like, is this fact or is this fiction? And then we'll check and see which one it was. Oh, no. Okay. So sexual assault is just rape. That is fiction. Rape is a form of sexual assault, but not all sexual assault is rape. So that's kind of like the difference between sexual assault and harassment, and kind of how sexual assault is like an umbrella term for a bunch of things, not just rape. So most perpetrators are people the victim knows. That's a fact. 8 out of 10 sexual assaults are committed by someone known to the victim. And this is kind of an interesting one to me because I know that when I was growing up, I was always under the impression that sexual assault would be like by someone I didn't know, like jumping me in the street, and it would be like really dark outside. But that's actually not the case. Most of the times it's by someone you know or that you're friends with or that you are, it's an acquaintance of yours. If a victim doesn't fight back, it couldn't have been assault. This is, of course, fiction. Many survivors experience tonic immobility or freeze response during an assault. So, yeah, this is kind of just in response to like, misconceptions or things that people might say. Definitely, if someone is being assaulted, that's a horrific, like terrifying event. And so they're going to have a freeze response. A lot of the times also people I know from like documentaries I've seen and stuff have said like, I thought that if I just like let it happen, it would be over faster and like I wouldn't get, even more hurt than I already was being. So definitely not true, and it is fiction. There is a high rate of false reporting. That is fiction. Only 2 to 8% of rapes are falsely reported. And this is actually the same percentage as regular crimes. So the same amount of false reporting for any other crime is the same amount of false reporting for rape. Most assaults occur at the victim's home. This is a fact. 55% of assaults occur at or near the victim's home. Again, just kind of like going back to that idea that a lot of people have of like the assault being like in the middle of the night, like when you were, walking alone and by someone who just jumped you and you don't know. That's actually not the case. It's usually by someone that you know, like at or near your house or a friend's house. Men can't be sexually assaulted. That is fiction. 1.5% of all men have been raped. And this statistic is probably not accurate because there is such a low reporting with men around this issue. That number is probably much higher because they're less likely to report. And there's like, a lot of stuff like men don't want to seem like weak, like, oh, and admit that this has happened to them. So that's definitely a really big issue also. Like I know that when I went to a bunch of the schools in my county and was doing education with them, like a lot of the guys like were disinterested. They didn't think that this issue affected them, and then found out that like, oh, this isn't just a women's issue. Like this issue affects everybody across the board. And some people didn't even know that men could be sexually assaulted. So definitely there needs to be a lot more education with sexual assault and men. All right, so I wanted to talk about some specific K through 12 sexual assault and harassment because this is an issue that is not talked about a lot because it can be uncomfortable sometimes. So to start off, there are 98,000 public schools in America, and there are 50 million students. That's 3 times the amount of students that are in higher education. So I know we talk a lot about sexual assault and harassment, in the workplace and college, but there are a lot of kids in K through 12 who are also being affected by this issue. So just some statistics. 81% of students between 8th and 12th grade report incidents of sexual harassment. There have been 652 complaints filed to the Department of Education, and this was in 2017, and 279 of those 652 reports were against K through 12 schools. So definitely just as prominent in K through 12 as in college. And then 30% of victims report that they were first raped between the ages of 11 and 17. So as much as this issue doesn't get talked about, it definitely is just as relevant in these younger grades as in higher grades. So now I wanted to talk a little bit about college assault and harassment. So just some statistics for that. 1 in 5 girls will be sexually assaulted while on college campus, and 1 in 16 boys. And again, this number is probably low because of the low numbers of reporting. And then on that note, 80% of the assaults go unreported. So there's a lot of issues like victim shaming and victim blaming, and issues with the school that make it so schools don't want to report, want to acknowledge reports, and kind of make students not feel comfortable to report when this issue has happened to them. Sometimes schools are oblivious of their obligations under the law. They underreport because they don't want to be like, hey, if you come to our school, it's almost guaranteed that you'll be assaulted. Like, no one wants their school to have really high reporting numbers, but unfortunately, not talking about the issue doesn't make it go away. And so it's really important for people to acknowledge when this issue is happening so that we can fix it. So this is also really important. The red zone. The red zone is the first 6 to 8 weeks of a semester, and this is when a student is most at risk being sexually assaulted. This is kind of what sparked my interest in this topic. The NPR story that I was listening to was on the red zone, which I had never heard of before, and I had no idea. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that this is like, there's actually a specific like amount of time where students are most at risk. Like, we acknowledge that people are most at risk during this time, but we're not doing anything about it. That seems crazy. Like, we should be wanting to fix it now that we know it's there. So I've been talking a lot about like the law and like schools not acknowledging, like, you know, or oblivious to what their responsibilities are under the law. So what are schools doing about it? Well, not that much. They're in fear of lawsuits and underreporting. The schools aren't educated. They're oblivious to the law, like I was saying earlier. And so the law is Title IX. And what is Title IX? Title IX is a civil rights law that protects people from discrimination based on sex in educational programs or activities that receive federal financial assistance. So even if it doesn't happen at school, say it happens like on a school field trip or, you know, at a sporting event or anything that is associated with school, you're covered under Title IX. Even if you weren't doing something that was related to school, if it affects you while you're at school, you're covered under Title IX. Also, this law doesn't just affect power-based personal violence. It also affects like making sure that there's girls sports teams as well as guys sports teams. So any sort of sex discrimination covered under the law. So given that more specifically, it covers gender-based violence, which is harmful acts committed against a person because of their gender. It covers dating violence, behaviors carried out by anyone. So it can be a teacher, administrator, you know, anyone who's employed by the school or a student. And at school or outside of school. So like I said, even if it didn't happen at a school-related activity, if it affects you while you're at school, it's covered. So kind of just moving on to the next topic, I wanted to talk about the bystander effect because this happens so frequently. There are other people who are affected. So what is the bystander effect? The bystander effect is when a person is present when an event takes place but isn't directly involved. And this happens all the time with sexual assault and harassment. So how we can be a helpful bystander. There's this thing called bystander intervention, which is when a bystander puts themselves into a situation where someone looks like they're going to be in harm's way to try to diffuse the situation. It's really important to make sure you're not also putting yourself in harm's way, so that there's different levels of being a bystander intervention. You can create a distraction, which would be like changing the conversation, saying like, this party is lame, let's go somewhere else, or starting a game that draws everyone in and kind of like takes people away from what could be going on. You could ask directly, ask like, did you come here with someone? Like, are you okay? Would you like me to stay with you? That's kind of more taking a direct approach. You could refer to an authority if you feel like getting yourself involved would be, putting yourself in harm's way. You could talk to a security guard or a bartender or a parent or anyone who's in charge who is around. And then enlist others. There's power in numbers. So, try to get other people involved to save someone from a situation that could be harmful to them. So then moving on to something that kind of fuels this, underreporting and victim shaming and victim blaming is rape culture, which permeates our society. And what is rape culture? Rape culture is a society or environment that normalizes or trivializes sexual assault and abuse. So this is definitely very prevalent in K through 12 and in college and in the workplace, but starting in K through 12, that's kind of where K through 12 becomes the breeding ground for college, for the workplace. It starts in, even as early as elementary school, when we teach these kids through our words and actions that rape culture is okay. When we say like not boys, just people. I know on my school bus, people would say like, oh, you just got raped. And like, no one would say like, that's not okay. You shouldn't say that, because that like, promotes that as being an okay thing. And also like saying dismissive things like boys will be boys. This all like encourages rape culture and doesn't shut it down. Also actions like questioning and blaming victims for what happened to them, not teaching consent or proper sex ed in elementary, middle, and high school. They were asking for it mentality, slut shaming, all of these things fuel rape culture. So a little bit more on slut shaming. Slut shaming is the practice of criticizing people, especially women and girls, who are perceived to violate expectations of behavior and appearance regarding to issues related to sexuality. And this is something that happened all the time while I was in elementary, middle, and high school, and it never occurred to me that this was something that was wrong until I was older and I learned about slut shaming, and I was like, oh, this is terrible. Like, why are only women being called sluts who sleep around? Like, there are no repercussions for men, really. It's just mostly the girls in my high school who are labeled sluts. And, some of the other things that are surrounding slut shaming were brought to my attention through this really amazing book and documentary called The Unslut Project. This woman, Emily Linden, she's here on this slide. She's holding the sign that says, when I was 11, I was labeled the school slut. And this was a really interesting and eye-opening book that I read. Emily Linden went to her childhood home. She found her childhood diaries and she was going back and reading them, and she was like, oh, this is crazy. Like, all the time when I was growing up, I was labeled a slut. I thought I was a slut, but I wasn't a slut. I was being taken advantage of by people who I went to school with. Like, I was being assaulted and harassed daily, and I thought it was my own fault. And that's terrible that I was led to think that it was my fault. So she kind of like published her childhood diaries, and then wrote in the sides things that she, now reflecting back on it, would like to say about these things that happened to her. And it was really eye-opening because I had experienced these things when I was in middle school and high school, and I had never really thought about like, oh, well, maybe there's other things going on, and people should never feel like the sexual assault and harassment is their fault. And I think that's something that happens more often than it should. And it's all just part of that rape culture that we teach students that, well, maybe you did something wrong, maybe it's your fault. So another really great example of rape culture that I would recommend is this documentary. It's called Roll Red Roll. It's on Netflix. It's really good, but it is also really kind of traumatic to watch. It's just very raw and very real, and it's a great documentary if you wanted to share with someone who said like, oh, rape culture is not real. Like, all you need to do is watch this film. It is really, really good. It's about these students who are on a football team, and they gang raped this girl, and they videotaped it and they tweeted about it and like posted on Facebook about it. And they were like, haha, we're so cool. This is like the funniest thing we've ever done. Like, we're so awesome. And then when and she was unconscious, she was just drunk, and then the next day, like, they deleted all the videos, all the tweets, everything. Like, the whole town covered it up because it was like their star football team, and they were their entertainment. They could never do anything wrong. So this one woman who was like a private investigator journalist, she found all of these tweets. She saw them before they were deleted, and she was like, that's not okay. Like, what's happening here? She did more research, and she found out that this has actually happened before. This was the second girl that they had done this to. So the documentary just kind of like dives really deep into rape culture and what we allow people to get away with, what we say is okay behavior, and kind of small town mentality and how they would like cover something up for a football team. So it was really, really great. I would highly recommend it. So I also just wanted to talk about rape culture in media, kind of just like how the media can sometimes romanticize really not good, bad behavior. So like stalking, stuff like that, 13 Reasons Why, assault can be romanticized like through these characters when they're like really horrible issues that should not be romanticized, but sometimes we do it anyways, and that can also fuel rape culture. So I wanted to talk about some things that have been going on in the news recently, because this issue of sexual assault and harassment and Title IX have been really hot in the news recently, because we have this woman, Betsy DeVos. She is the Secretary of Education, and she runs the Department of Education. And in 2018, she released some changes that she was going to be making to Title IX. And the version that she released had like a section that people could write comments to, and there were 124,000 comments left from the public that had to be reviewed. So the changes to Title IX got pushed off a year because of all of these comments. So after reviewing the comments, the changes have finally, as of like, I think last Wednesday, been released. And some of the changes are good, some of them not so good. Hold on. Okay, so the changes redefine sexual harassment, and this is sort of one of the not good changes. It changes sexual harassment and assault to being severe and pervasive. So it has to be both of those things for it to be sexual harassment. And this can be not a good thing, because then it limits the amount of people who have a case against someone or their school. So that definitely restricts survivor rights. Also, now the school has the ability to hold a live hearing where victims will be questioned. They'll be like put on a stand and questioned about and cross-examined about what happened to them. This is definitely infringing on survivor rights, especially since this is something that many survivors would not be comfortable with. But on the other hand, there are some good things that came out of it, like notifications. So anytime any student reports something, it has to be looked into, and that can be a report to anyone. So whether it's a bus driver or a janitor or anyone who's an employee of a school, if someone comes to them and says like, I was assaulted, I'm being harassed, it has to be investigated, no matter who they're telling. And also the new Title IX rules add dating violence and stalking to the things that are considered as sexual harassment and covered under Title IX. So that's really good as well. All right, and so I wanted to just talk about some activism that we can do on both a macro and micro scale, because I think it's really important for people to try to get involved as much as they can and start this really important conversation. So what can we do on a micro scale? How can we engage in micro activism? Well, definitely being an engaged bystander, doing some of those bystander intervention things that we talked about earlier, those can be really crucial. Shutting down toxic language, like when you hear someone saying boys will be boys, saying like, well, that's actually not an okay thing to say, and here's why. And then raising awareness. So if someone says something, like ask the question, being like, oh, well, actually, did you know we have Title IX? Because that's something that a lot of people are unaware of and unfamiliar with. Like a lot of people that I had talked to didn't even know that Title IX existed or that they had rights as a student on a campus. So definitely using your voice to raise awareness is a great thing that you can do. And then on a macro scale, you can host a screen-in and a discussion. So if you wanted to talk about rape culture and you wanted to show Roll Red Roll at your school, and then host a discussion with a panel afterwards and have people ask questions, or join or start an organization. You know, at my school, in my county, I decided to start an organization because one didn't exist. But if one does exist and you want to get involved so that you can continue to raise awareness and make change, that's a really, really great thing to do as well. And then go to your school board if you are more into, you know, legal stuff, law. There, every school board has a Title IX director. You could talk to them. You could petition your school board. You can get involved in lots of ways with your school board relating to Title IX and your school county. But the most important thing with any of your activism, the most important thing to do with this topic is start the conversation. I think this is so important because with sexual assault and harassment, it's not a popular topic. It's not something that people want to talk about. And so if you can start the conversation, you've done the most important thing. I think since sexual assault and harassment is so prevalent, that you will have no problem maintaining the conversation because everybody has experienced something like this. Everybody knows someone who has experienced something like this, but a lot of people think if we don't talk about it, it's not a problem. And that is very much not the case. The most important thing you can do and the hardest thing to do is starting the conversation, whether that be with other students or within your school, but getting the conversation started is the most important step that you can take. So I wanted to talk about some different resources that are available out there because starting a conversation is hard, but there's a lot of great resources that are available to you. And these are just some of my favorites. So if you're looking for more general, all-encompassing resources, two that I really like are Stop Sexual Assault in Schools and Safe Bay. Stop Sexual Assault in Schools has really comprehensive toolkits and educational videos. And also if you're looking, you know, if you know someone or you have been someone who has experienced sexual assault and harassment and you don't know what to do and you're looking to get help on what's the next step, Stop Sexual Assault in Schools is a really great resource for that. Safe Bay also has really, really great videos. I know that I have used Safe Bay videos for like, you know, student engagement videos, like students talking about like their experience, you know, getting other student perspective. They have a lot of really great resources, videos, you know, different things that you can do within your school. Like they're a really great resource. It's On Us is another really great resource for videos and action plans. They also have chapters at different campuses around the country. So if you're looking to start a sexual assault and harassment action group at your college, you might have an It's On Us chapter at your school, or if you don't, you can start one by reaching out to them because they are really interested in educating and stopping sexual assault and harassment on college campuses. And then some more like factual based organizations or resources online. Know Your Nine. That's a really great resource to go to if you're looking for like specific things under Title IX, like, I'm wondering, like, is this covered under Title IX specifically? Know Your Nine is a really great place to go to look because they lay out like specifically what is covered under Title IX, like the changes are all laid out, everything is on their site. And then RAIN is another really good place to get information like definitions and you know, examples, stuff like that. They're also the rape crisis hotline is on RAIN. So if you're looking for that, RAIN is a really great place to go. And this is my favorite community like action program for college campuses in reference to Title IX. Hands Off Our Knowledge. They have all sorts of resources for letter writing campaigns about Title IX, hosting a town hall with Betsy DeVos about Title IX, all sorts of things to raise awareness about the changes to Title IX, what Title IX is, events, everything is all on this site. And it's really interesting because people are already lining up to take these new changes to Title IX to court. So, through legislation, these changes can be reversed in Senate and the House of Representatives. But if you're looking to do something on more of a grassroots, like local basis, Hands Off R9 is a really great place to go to look to see what you could do. And then I had talked about some other documentaries earlier, like the Unslut Project and Roll, Run, Roll, but some other really great documentaries are It Happened Here, which that's the documentary that I've shown in college and in high school. It's amazing. I love it. It's really good for if you're looking for something that shows what to do. Kind of like after the assault happened, these are what these girls did to take on their schools through the legal process. So that's like a really great resource for that. The Hunting Ground is a film that covers more of the victim shaming and victim blaming within college campus that happens when people try to report a sexual assault or harassment on their campus, kind of like how they were met with shaming and blaming. And then Audrey and Daisy is a really great documentary that covers two girls who were raped at a party and then the aftermath in their high school. All right, so now I would like to open it up to discussion. If there are any questions or any just discussions that you guys would like to have. Now that we've covered all the basics, now is the time.
And I'll pause recording for this, just so you know.